All right, so we got a massive update here for you guys on those debt ceiling negotiations that we have been tracking over the last couple of months. So first, to start off, I just want to go through what, as in terms of as of right now, we know is potentially going to be in this deal, and then we're going to get to the more important conversation, in my opinion, which is, why are we even having a debt ceiling negotiation, a concept of the debt ceiling that shouldn't even exist in the first place. But we're just going to start off here. So as pointed out by Ed Krasenstein, who has a very interesting history, but he has a rundown here of some of the major points here. But he says the debt ceiling is going to be raised for 2 years. Okay, so basically, we're just kicking the can down the road for 2 years to have another similar situation to what we just went through with this, potential cliff that we were going to be intentionally walking off of, imploding the US and global economy potentially. All right, and we're just going to do that again in 2 years. Sounds like fun. Great work, guys. Okay, so this is basically getting Joe Biden over the hump for his first term in office, so potentially won't have that big of an impact, obviously, for the 2024 election, but we're just going to end up doing this again, and we've now set the precedent because Joe Biden refused to do the other things, the other options that were on the table to address the debt limit or even get rid of it. Now we have the precedent that if Republicans have one chamber of Congress, whether it's the House or the Senate, they can just hold the entire world hostage in order to extract some of these concessions or austerity measures that they otherwise wouldn't have been able to get done through the normal legislative process. So they continue here. Unsurprisingly, non-defense spending is essentially capped for 2024 and 2025. So what does that mean? Well, it means since we have pretty high inflation right now and have had consistent inflation for months now at this point, if you're capping the spending and you're keeping things pretty even, then you're essentially doing cuts. Okay, now Republicans are saying, oh, it's not really cuts because you're just doing, a spending freeze, and Democrats have been parroting this as well. Oh, it's a freeze, it's not a cut. Well, again, if you have inflation, and you get $100 from X program, and then the next year, after that inflation takes place, you still get $100 because of that spending freeze, well, then you just lost money because that money is worth less because of inflation. Not that complicated of a concept, but they're being extremely dishonest about it. They say the age threshold for SNAP work requirements will increase from 49 to 54 years of age for adults who don't have children. Okay, so again, we're going after food stamps. Now again, they're raising the age, basically that you have to be working to get eligibility for those food stamps. And I mean, again, keep in mind, as we're cutting these food stamps, as pointed out here by Ken Klippenstein, we're also raising the military budget, right? So not only are we cutting non-defense, discretionary spending in the form of like food stamps, but then we're raising the Pentagon budget apparently from 800 billion to 885 billion. So what they want you to believe is that we magically have just like $85 billion lying around or pulling it out of our asses in order to give to this Pentagon slush fund that's failed 5 audits in a row, okay, and as we just covered a couple of days ago on this channel, is getting absolutely fleeced by these private weapons manufacturers where they're upcharging us for parts and for equipment by like 1,000%, okay, but that deserves a budget raise, okay, that complete slush fund, corrupted, over bloated and, full of waste, fraud, and abuse institution of the Pentagon, that gets a budget increase, but then like marginal help in the form of food aid to the poorest people on the bottom rung of the ladder, that needs to be cut. So what they're trying to convince you is that there's some sort of waste, fraud, and abuse in the food stamps program, but not the Pentagon. That can't pass an audit. That's frequently getting fleeced by private weapons. I mean, again, it's just a ridiculous conversation. They are deeply unserious. Even if you took them at face value that like we desperately need to get the debt and the deficit under control right now, the first things you would do is go after the Pentagon budget and then tax the wealthy more. Okay, undo those Trump, 2017 tax cuts where 83% of the benefits went to the richest people and corporations in the country. Those would be the first 2 things that you do, but they just completely took that off the table as a part of this like apparently massively important, push to get the debt under control. I mean, it's completely unserious. But they say there also will be, now this is somewhat of a good thing, work requirements removed for homeless people and for veterans. Okay, so that part of it is good, right? Seems pretty common sense that if you're homeless, you probably shouldn't have to try to figure out some impossible way to go get a job if you're in that situation, right? And keep in mind, I mean, a lot of homeless people are working jobs, at least part-time, for a huge percentage of them. But if you're on, if you're on food stamps and you're homeless, that might be like literally your only lifeline in order to survive. So I guess that aspect of it is good. They continue, they say, Republicans get what they generally want conflict with new work requirements. Okay, there we go. In TANF or TANF for cash assistance recipients. That's the needy families part. So we're going after needy families and people on food stamps. Great. Okay. They say veterans' medical care is protected. That's unironically a good thing, right? Cuts are made to the IRS funding in 2023. Now, some of the more far-right Republicans are angry that they didn't cut the IRS funding enough, basically, because remember, Joe Biden passed some bill that is like, rehiring people and adding some resources to the IRS. That's a good thing, but they're saying it's not enough based on what they're already cutting out of this. Now, keep in mind, guys, they are trying to get you to believe that they care, first and foremost, about getting the deficit down, okay? And we know, according to the data, it's around like a 1-to-6 ratio between the dollar that you put into the IRS funding and the amount that they are able to recuperate with that dollar in taxes, okay? Because we're talking about nearly $1 trillion a year, it's estimated, that wealthy people and corporations in this country, the billionaire and millionaire class, are cheating on their taxes, okay? So that's money the government could have. That's revenue that would decrease the deficit, but they flip it around on its head. So effectively, by cutting this IRS funding, okay, under the bullshit guise that they're trying to help working class people, okay, what they're doing is they are increasing the deficit and then also making it harder for the IRS to go after the wealthiest people and corporations in this country, okay? I mean, the agenda is so clear. It's not complicated. It's very in your face. They continue. They say payments must begin again for those with student loans who had their loan payments paused due to COVID. Okay, fantastic. So as people are already in a precarious economic position, especially younger people with student loan debt, okay, now we're going to force them after over a year and a half or so, ever since COVID initially began and we did that emergency freeze on the student loan payments. That started under Trump. So we're talking about years now where these people have not had to pay their student loans for the most part, depending on what kind of loan that you have. And now we're just going to restart that after a couple of years when people are not exactly in an economic position to be able to do it. Okay, fantastic. And they say student loan borrowers will still be eligible for now, okay, for that $20,000 potential if you're a Pell Grant recipient, debt relief if they qualify, pending the current SCOTUS ruling. So we could have the right-wing SCOTUS just overturn Joe Biden's measly like $10,000 to $20,000 in student debt forgiveness and end up with nothing as we are starting to resume the payments. I mean, they really are just going completely out of their way to fuck average working class people as a part of this. He also adds here, the House still needs to approve these changes and the overall agreement. Now, we did have some names on the Republican side, the so-called Freedom Caucus, that it seems like they're not happy with this bill because, again, they don't think there's enough cuts for working class people. And their names are Dan Bishop, Keith Self, Chip Roy, Ken Buck, Ralph Norman, Bob Good, Matt Rosendale, Andy Biggs, Andrew Clyde, and Lauren Boebert, of course. So basically, this comes down to like a calculation. Are we going to be able to get, or are there going to be enough Republicans that are going to defect away from McCarthy and are going to try to tank this bill? I mean, keep in mind, it's May 29th right now. June 1st is the deadline before like all of this calamity starts to unfold. So are there going to be enough holdouts on the Republican side to tank it? What are the squad members doing right now, right? AOC, Jamal Bowman, the rest of them. I mean, I know a lot of them were pushing for other solutions like the 14th Amendment to address the debt ceiling and to basically effectively make it unconstitutional. But we'll circle back to that here in a second. But like, what is your plan for trying to push back against some of this? Or are you just going to roll over once again and do exactly what the Democratic establishment wants you to do? I mean, it seems like that's exactly what's going to end up happening. But a couple other points here that I wanted to get across. So as pointed out here by David Sirota, just in terms of like how stupid this conversation even is, the fact that we're having this debate or put ourselves in this position in the first place. So he says, the federal deal or the budget deal freezes spending on social programs amid an upsurge in the number of Americans who say that they're struggling to survive. The deal is predicated on pundits' lie that spending, rather than corporate profiteering, is driving inflation. So he's 100% right. I mean, this goes for the Fed policy as well as this debt ceiling, negotiations that we've been tracking, right? Because at the end of the day, the fundamental premise for this, the reason that McCarthy is calling for, these cuts to these food programs and all of the rest of them, the needy families programs as well, the reason is because he thinks like people are just sitting at home, not doing work and just chilling and raking in the big bucks from the government and just going out and buying all of these commodities and they're doing so well. And that's what's driving inflation, is that we've had such a radical increase in consumer, demand side economics because we had so much stimulus for average working class people, and that is what drove inflation. It's just not true. What actually drove inflation overwhelmingly, in fact, by some estimates, the majority of it, is just corporate profiteering. It's price gouging from the largest and wealthiest corporations in the country and around the world. That is what has primarily been driving inflation. So if you wanted to address that, okay, as an issue, if you wanted to actually tackle a huge chunk of inflation, you wouldn't be going after people on food stamps and people on the TANF programs, okay, TANF. You wouldn't be going after those people while also behind closed doors trying to push for things like Social Security, Medicare cuts, even though Trump threw cold water on that plan. But you wouldn't be doing that. You also, if you're the Fed, wouldn't be raising interest rates to try to throw millions of people out of work. What you would actually do is do something like a windfall profits tax or price controls or break up these monopolies. I mean, so many different things that you could do, tax the wealthy more in order to pull money out of the economy. But of course, they're choosing to go after people who are on the bottom rung of the ladder, right? In the worst economic situation. And again, it's also just stupid because according to the 14th Amendment, I mean, I read it to you guys in one of my more recent videos covering this topic. The 14th Amendment pretty explicitly says that the notion of a debt ceiling where we would default on our loan payments is unconstitutional. It essentially says the full faith and credit of our debt obligations or the loans that we make has to be paid. It cannot be violated, right? And so if that's what the Constitution says, then why are we even having these conversations all the time about the debt ceiling? It's unconstitutional. It shouldn't exist. And so there were a lot of people who were calling on Joe Biden to use this strategy and basically say, the debt ceiling is null and void, and then that would effectively punt it up to the Supreme Court to take that on. Now, what do we know about the Supreme Court? Well, we know, thank you, Clarence Thomas, for making it even more explicitly clear with his, private jet and super yacht trips with Harlan Crow, a billionaire mogul, okay? We know that the Supreme Court serves corporate America. So then the question becomes, is the Supreme Court going to look at a pretty solid argument that the debt ceiling is unconstitutional and reject it and thereby risk imploding the U.S. economy, hurting the people who helped get these people into their seats in the first place, taking the global economy down with it? I mean, would they really do that? Maybe they would, maybe they wouldn't. I tend to think that they probably wouldn't make that risk, okay? So this is something that Joe Biden could have done. Not only did he not do this and sort of laughed it off, but his administration was pushing against an already existing piece of legislation or an already existing lawsuit that I think was taking place in Massachusetts, where some federal employees who would be affected by a debt default if we didn't get some negotiation through this process, and they were arguing explicitly along these lines of the 14th Amendment, and Biden was fighting against them. Okay, because he just believes that the debt ceiling is something that is valid, that should exist. I mean, it's completely absurd. And by the way, okay, this is something that I just learned just a couple of days ago. We are like the only industrialized country on the face of the planet that has a debt ceiling situation like this. Okay, there's only like one other one, I think it's the Netherlands or Denmark or whatever, that has a debt ceiling, but it's so astronomically high that they will never hit it. We are the only country that has to do this every couple of years. We just like did that concept ourselves, all right? Nobody else is as stupid as us, apparently. And then the worst part about it, or one of the worst parts about all of this, is that Democrats could have solved this issue, okay, during the lame duck session, after they lost the 2022 midterms. They could have done it before that as well, okay? But I mean, we have articles like this from Semaphore. They say there appears to be a growing sense of regret within Democratic ranks that the party missed an opportunity to neutralize the debt limit threat when they fully controlled Congress and the White House for 2 years. You don't say. They say that Senator Tim Kaine of Virginia told Politico that if he could do one thing different, it would have been raising the debt limit late last year. The Democratic Senate aide vented to Semaphore that the debt ceiling could have been raised in the American Rescue Plan or in reconciliation. So he's lamenting the fact that they didn't do this, as if we didn't know what exactly was coming. Okay, Bernie Sanders at the time was explicitly telling Democrats to do this very thing and was warning them that if they didn't do that during the lame duck session, that Republicans would weaponize it against Democrats and use a hostage situation in order to extract these concessions. And what did Joe Biden do? He effectively was basically going with the mindset of like, no. The Republicans, they're not that crazy, man. They're going to bargain in good faith. We're going to have a little bipartisan, sit around a campfire and sing Kumbaya and everything will be great, right? They're not going to try to take us hostage and point a gun to the head of the U.S. and global economy. They wouldn't dare to do that. Of course they were going to do that. And we knew that they were going to do that. And Democrats just sat on their hands and did absolutely nothing. I mean, again, the entire conversation is completely ridiculous for so many different reasons. One, you could argue that the debt ceiling is unconstitutional according to the 14th Amendment. Two, Democrats were incompetent or malicious by refusing to even attempt to tackle the debt ceiling when they held all three chambers. Okay, then you have Joe Biden, instead of using the bully pulpit aggressively, basically trying to do like backroom wheeling and dealing with, dishonest actors within the Republican Party in order to get austerity measures pushed on average working class people. And then above all of that, it's just stupid because the conversation about the debt ceiling or the deficit, it's just complete nonsense, okay? The real question, the real substance of what we should be talking about in terms of government spending doesn't have anything to do with what the deficit is, okay? You can have deficit spending that's good and deficit spending that's bad. It's not inherently good or inherently bad. Same with the debt ceiling. It's not inherently good or inherently bad. It's about what are you spending your money on, right? Are you dumping money into an endless slush fund for the military when they can't pass an audit and they're getting fleeced by private weapons manufacturers, okay? Upcharged by like 1,000, 10,000% in some circumstances? Are you giving money to that? Doesn't seem effective. Are you wasting money or lowering the revenue that you're bringing in by slashing taxes for billionaires and corporate America? Okay, again, trickle-down economics, not exactly effective. We've had decades of that demonstrated. Or the alternative to those spending options or, blowing up the deficit to do those things, right, would be actually investing in the future, right? Investing in things like infrastructure, investing in things like healthcare and education, okay, for the American people, to uplift people on the bottom rung of the ladder instead of helping the people at the top. Okay, I mean, that's what you would actually do. And not only would that, in many instances, actually lower the debt and deficit if you did things like letting Medicare negotiate all drug prices, as many other countries do around the world, right? If we allowed the government to directly regulate and negotiate drug prices, that would cut the amount that Medicare is paying for those. It would lower the deficit, right? But they don't entertain talks around that, okay? I mean, so many different examples that we could get into in terms of policies that would actually grow the economy, that would create millions of good paying jobs, the Green New Deal, for example, okay? But they don't want to actually do that because they don't give a shit about the debt or the deficit, okay? They just want to have a dishonest conversation about this concept and perpetuate it out into the future so that they can use this as an opportunity to continue giving handouts to their wealthy buddies while screwing over average working class people.
Everyone is saying good Politic guy has the best Politic. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying